The Jets have the longest playoff drought in major pro sports, but that seems primed to change in 2024. What's different this year? Let's talk about it today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Tuesday, July 30th, 2024, and I'm your host, John B. from GanggreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listener, first watch every day. Subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, so you'll get new episodes of this podcast whenever they're posted. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out and helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs have wound down, the sports have stopped sportsing like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster or bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, today we're going to talk about the 2024 Jets, specifically how they're different from the teams we've seen the last 13 years. The Jets, of course, have a 13-year postseason drought. It is the longest, not just in the NFL. It is the longest postseason drought in any of the four major professional sports. And, the Jets have the longest drought in the NFL. The Jets have the longest drought in the NFL by 5 years. It's been a really tough go of things for Jets fans. And finally, hopefully, and I understand if you have your guard up. I do myself a little bit. When I think when you're a Jets fan, you always have your guard up a little bit. But you can finally see this year maybe a little light at the end of the tunnel. This team is a lot of talent on paper. This team, I dare say, should make the playoffs. This team doesn't make the playoffs. Something very wrong has happened. So what's different between the 2024 Jets and, generally speaking, the Jets teams that have come between 2011 and 2023? Now, I say this with some degree of trepidation because, I would have said this a year ago, and we all know how things worked out. But I think in the NFL, if you have a competent quarterback, you've got a shot to win. And the Jets have somebody who, you would hope is going to be more than a competent quarterback in Aaron Rodgers, a guy who is going to go to the Hall of Fame, a guy who is one of the top 15 quarterbacks of all time. And, if you want to talk about the Jets' woes over the last 13 years, I think any discussion would probably start with the guys who have been playing quarterback, because the Jets have gone to the same formula over and over and over again. They've gone with young quarterbacks that they've drafted. Mark Sanchez was the last quarterback to take the Jets to the playoffs, and saying Mark Sanchez took the Jets to the playoffs is a bit of a stretch. I mean, the Jets were taken to the playoffs that year, those 2 years, 29 and 2010, by their defense and by their run game, their offensive line, and a great special teams unit. And to the extent the passing game worked, I mean, a lot of it was due to them having talented receivers. And once the infrastructure went away, Sanchez wasn't as good. Jets drafted Geno Smith, who was a very raw quarterback out of West Virginia, just pretty much threw him into an impossible situation. Geno's kind of resurrected his career, has been a little bit of a late bloomer, but at the point the Jets were throwing Geno in there, in retrospect, he never had a shot. Of course, we know Sam Darnold. Jets, again, draft this young quarterback who's very raw, throw him into an impossible situation. It doesn't work out. Jets draft Zach Wilson, very raw quarterback. Not as impossible a situation, especially year two, but that doesn't work out. Year one was an impossible situation. Year three was an impossible situation. The year that really kind of destroyed his career was year two, and it wasn't an impossible situation, but didn't work out. Look, it's great when you draft a quarterback and he turns into C.J. Stroud. The reality, though, is that most quarterbacks drafted, dare I say, even guys drafted high in the first round, aren't ready to hit the ground running. In fact, in this 13-year stretch where the Jets have struggled so many times going with the young quarterback, the best quarterback seasons they've gotten were probably 2015 Ryan Fitzpatrick and 2017 Josh McCown, veterans, guys who understood how to set the protection, guys who understood where the ball needs to go. And the McCown 2017 season, that's your second best quarterback. That's one of your top quarterback seasons of the last 13 years. It shows you why you missed the playoffs, because it's not like McCown was that good, just probably better relatively speaking to the guys who didn't really know what they were doing in year one, year two, year three, year four of their careers. So the Jets have a quarterback who won't just know where the ball's going, a quarterback who knows where the ball's going, who can get the team in the right play, as well as any quarterback who's ever played. If Aaron Rodgers sees something at the line of scrimmage, this is one of the key things, is that when you're a young quarterback, you're just barely trying to survive. You're just trying to keep your head above water. And you're hoping that the other guy, you're hoping that your teammates help you out. You're hoping the center, sees sees a blitz maybe you missed. You're hoping, the receiver sees the same thing as you at the line of scrimmage if he needs to adjust his route. The Jets now have a guy who's going to be just run everything at the line of scrimmage. It's going to be so different this year. And there will be moments where we won't notice it, but Aaron Rodgers will have changed something at the line that will turn a play that would not have worked into something that will work. It could be something as simple as adjusting a receiver's route. It could be something as simple as checking to a run when the box is light, which the Jets, haven't done enough all these years with these young quarterbacks. And I'll take it a step further. I think there's something to be said for the idea that, a veteran quarterback is going to hold people accountable, especially someone with Aaron Rodgers' stature. Rodgers has spoken about this a bit last year when he was away from the team, his frustration with, the leaks that came in, especially that story about Zach Wilson that came out through The Athletic. He talked about, this isn't a winning culture. And I get the feeling Rodgers, it seems like everybody, at least on paper, it seems, or at least, from what people are saying, it sounds like everybody really respects Rodgers. Yesterday, and I really don't like following like the minutia of the day to day. I always say I look for the longer term stories out of training camp. But yesterday, the offense really struggled at training camp. And there are two ways you can approach this. You can approach this the way a lot of the media do, is like, oh my God, is the Jets offense in trouble because of one bad practice. You can approach it the way I do. They had a bad practice. That's bound to happen. Everybody has a bad day at the office. And, Joe Tippmann was apparently struggling snapping the ball yesterday. It was just, the receivers weren't doing the job. And Rodgers gathered everybody together. And, apparently Rodgers, had some words with them. And that's not to say that, it's that big of a deal. It's not, it's a very small example of how things are different this year. It's not a knock on Zach Wilson to say, I don't think Zach Wilson would have done that, because I don't know that Zach Wilson had the credibility to do that this time last year or this time 2 years ago. It's just different when you have a guy who's done it. I think many cases from what I've heard, and look, I've never played in the NFL, but from what I understand, look, guys respect people. To have respect, it has to be earned through your level of commitment, through your level of play, through your history on the field. And the Jets now have somebody in the locker room who should be able to hold people accountable more than they've been held accountable in the past. I mean, unfortunately, I think things kind of fell apart last year once he left. I don't think the Jets had the leadership once he went down because he was away from the team. So the hope this year is that Rodgers provides some of that leadership that the team needs. And I think any winning team, they have those guys and those forces in the locker room. It's not always the quarterback. The Baltimore Ravens, it was Ray Lewis, a linebacker, but it frequently is the quarterback. It frequently is the quarterback who gathers everybody. It frequently is the quarterback who galvanizes everybody. Jets have not had that in a long time. And on some level, I don't want to give them a complete pass because they've drafted a lot of quarterbacks who are busts, and that's on them. On some level, you understand what they're trying to do, because everybody wants the lightning in the bottle scenario. Everybody wants the CJ Stroud guy who's going to step in and light the league on fire, and you're paying him nothing for 4 years, and suddenly you got an elite quarterback. It's tough to do, though. And the Jets now have a veteran. They now have a guy who, and we said this time last year, so knock on wood, hopefully he stays healthy this year. But the change of quarterback is a big deal. Change of quarterback is not the only thing that's a big deal, though. And there's a big change from last year to this year, or at least we hope there will be. And here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about it, because it's one thing to have the quarterback who knows where to get the ball, who knows what play to get you into. If you can't control the trenches, that doesn't necessarily do you that much good. And the Jets should be able to control the trenches this year. We'll go into more detail on that continuing here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much that I never want them to stop. But playoffs have wound down in the NHL and NBA, and as a result, we have fewer games now. And the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel can help you keep the sports going whenever you want. All you have to do is open the app, dream up bets anytime you're in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Yankees and Mets in action. If you're a local baseball fan, if you're not a local baseball fan, some Jets fans root for teams outside of New York. You can wager on FanDuel. And of course, football season's coming up. There are some Jets bets you can make. Jets underdogs week 1 in San Francisco. You can also make bets on how the Jets are going to do this season. Just head over to FanDuel.com and make the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. Big shout out to you every dayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. We have new episodes each day, Monday through Friday. Today, we're talking about what's different this year with the Jets versus the previous 13. And of course, it's difficult to lump all 13 years in there. There are some years where the Jets have been better in one area than another. But generally speaking, I mean, there are some pretty clear patterns that have kept the Jets from making the playoffs. And I'm going to say something that's a little controversial right now. I think that if Aaron Rodgers had not gotten injured last year, Joe Douglas would be in a lot more trouble right now than people think. Because if Rodgers had not gotten trouble last year, had not gotten injured last year, people would have seen how bad I think people would have appreciated better how badly of a job Joe Douglas did putting together that offensive line. And it shouldn't have been a shock to anybody, because we were talking this time last year about how risky what the Jets were doing at tackle was when they were going with a 38-year-old guy in Dwayne Brown and a guy who hadn't played in 2 years in Mekhi Becton. It's one thing to roll the dice that one of those two guys can work out. The Jets needed both of those guys to work out. And the Jets ended up suffering injury after injury. Connor McGovern goes down. He was having a pretty lousy season before that anyway. And Elijah Barrett-Tucker goes down. And the Jets just did not have a competent offensive line. And if Rodgers had been in there, people would have noticed. I think what happened, Douglas in some ways, not in every way. Obviously, your starting quarterback goes down. You can't say you were super lucky. But in some ways, Douglas was a little lucky based on how things went. Because if Rodgers was back there taking hit after hit after hit, people would have noticed. For the Jets, this was true of Douglas and Saleh. It became very convenient just to lay all the problems at the feet of Zach Wilson. And we went through the first side. We talked about why having a veteran quarterback is a big deal. I'm not here to tell you it's irrelevant. But the Jets had a ridiculous offensive line last year. And yes, they did have injuries. But you know something? Joe Douglas has been the general manager since 2019. And if you want to say that wasn't his team, fine. I would even agree with you on that. Joe Douglas started building this team in 2020. And they had zero offensive line depth last year. And that goes back to Maccagnan. It goes back to John Idzik. The Jets let the offensive line wither and just kind of fall out after that phenomenal unit they had 2009, 2010. In 2010, the Jets had one of the best offensive lines in the league. The Jets may have had the best offensive line in football in 2010. Same was true the year before. They made the playoffs both years. Offensive line has really fallen off since then. I don't think it's a coincidence Jets haven't made the playoffs since then. So what did the Jets do this offseason? They made what I thought was a very savvy trade for Morgan Moses. Really solid guy, not a star, but you can't, great offensive lines aren't built on 5 stars. They're built on solid guys who, are dependable. Morgan Moses fits that very well. They also went out and got Tyron Smith. And, look, I'd be lying to you if I told you Tyron Smith was my first choice. I'd be lying to you if I told you I felt 100% good about this Tyron Smith thing, because if we're being honest, this is a very risky move. But at the price they got him for, and given the Jets' situation where they needed the left tackle, and given the lack of other credible alternatives, and given my concern that they were going to sign David Bakhtiari, who, if Tyron Smith is injury prone, David Bakhtiari is just injured. He can't stay. Tyron Smith, it's a gamble. Can he stay on the field? Bakhtiari, we know, can't stay on the field. So with all this said, they only gave him, $6.5 million. If it works out, it's going to work out really well. If it doesn't, Jets could have issues at left tackle. At least they haven't spent a lot of money. But the Jets also got some insurance in Olu Fashanu. And, I'm a little hesitant to give Joe Douglas too much credit here, because I feel like we've been here before with him where we're saying, hey, this could work out on the offensive line. On paper, this looks pretty decent. And sometimes it doesn't work out. And sometimes, in hindsight, we look back and say, you know what? Maybe we shouldn't have given him that credit. Maybe there were some warning signs there to begin with. But I think if you were asking me at the start of the offseason, would I be satisfied if the Jets got Morgan Moses back and didn't really give up much for him in a trade? If they rolled the dice with Tyron Smith for $6.5 million, hey, I mean, it's an upside play. They drafted Olu Fashanu. Would I have signed up for that? I mean, look, the Jets went into this offseason with nothing. In an ideal world, when you have great choices at your disposal, when your GM's done a good job, when you've methodically developed guys through the years, when you've maybe took a guy with potential in the mid rounds 2-3 years ago, and you've developed him. And he's ready to start into the slide into the starting lineup. In an ideal world like that, where you've done a good job year after year after year, and you very steadily built your offensive line. Would I have liked this? This would not, obviously not. Given where the Jets were, where they had nothing, were these reasonable gambles to take? Yes. Does the addition of Fashanu potentially, give the Jets a guy who can play left tackle for them for a long time? Yes. I am conflicted on this because I'm a big believer good general manager work is not done in the splashy moves. It's not, I'm an even bigger believer that's not done in like a 1-year interval. We're gonna have to figure out what we're doing in the offensive line a year after this. You don't like to go year to year, but for this year, for a 1-year scenario, given where the Jets were, they now at least have a shot to have a very good offensive line. I'm not even going to say credible. I think this offensive line can be quite good if everybody stays healthy and if everybody, keeps playing at the level they're playing. They have some older guys in there. The Jets have a very good chance. I mean, I'd even say they should be able to control the point of attack this year. That means more big runs for Breece Hall because Breece Hall is going to actually have holes to run through instead of needing to create everything by himself. You saw what Breece did last year with an offensive line that created nothing for him. He still ripped off big runs. Now he's got an offensive line that can create for him. And, every time Breece touches the ball is an opportunity for a home run. With Rodgers back there this year, with none of this Dwayne Brown, Mekhi Becton nonsense, with actual credible players, or at least guys who should be credible players, blocking at the tackle positions, he should be able to, operate. If the Jets can keep him clean, he's going to play well. I mean, is he going to be vintage Rodgers? I don't know, but he should be able to play well if the Jets do a good job up front. Barrett Tucker, hopefully he stays healthy. This has been a big difference. Offensive line has been a chronic issue for the New York Jets in the last 13 years. It's gotten worse and worse over time because at least in 2011, you still had the remnants of that 06 draft. You still had the Brickashaw, Ferguson, and Nick Mangold for 5 or so more years. After they retired, that's where everything really just fell apart for this team. And the Jets have a lot of challenges building this offense. And I want to make it clear, like when it comes to the long term, I'm not a fan of what Joe Douglas has been doing on the offensive line. But for this year, for 1 year, for this one off season, I think that the gambles he made were reasonable. And I think that there's a good chance they're going to work out. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to the other side of the ball. Through this 13-year stretch, the Jets have typically had a pretty good defense. Even when they've been losing, they've been able to slow teams down with a few exceptions. But there's one big difference in the way they built this defense versus the way they've built their defenses in the past. And I'm going to tell you what that is continuing here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all at prices viewed from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets, but not just Major League Baseball. You can go to other sports, comedy, music, theater. It's all there on Gametime. I've used it myself. I mean, I still can't believe some of the deals I've gotten using the Gametime app. Just a hour or two before my event started, I pulled out my phone, opened up the app, and got an amazing deal. And you can see the view from your seat. They have pictures of the seat you'll be sitting in, so there's no surprises when you arrive. No, you're not going to end up in some obstructed view. It's an amazing app. It's one of my go-tos when I buy tickets. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDONNFL, for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Tuesday. We're talking about what could be different this year for the New York Jets versus the previous 13 years. We've talked about the quarterback. And I've probably undersold the quarterback because my point with the quarterback is that they have a veteran now. And it's ridiculous to just say they have a veteran now when you got Aaron Rodgers. But I think the point stands. And anything you can say about a veteran, probably goes double for Aaron Rodgers, that specific veteran. We've talked about the offensive line, how, on paper at least, it seems like the Jets finally are going to have an offensive line that can move people on the defensive side of the ball. Now I want to talk about the Jets defense. And one of the things that's been interesting, talking Rex Ryan, when you're talking Todd Bowles, when you're talking Greg Williams, the Jets have usually, even when they've been bad, had at least a credible defense. And many times they've had bad teams and their defense has been very good. But those defenses were primarily built around stopping the run. And in today's NFL, you win games by passing the ball and shutting down the other team's passing game. And the Jets have struggled a lot in the last 13 years shutting down the passing attack. So while many of the Jets' defenses were at least credible on paper, a lot of that goes back to the way they shut down the run. And I would rather have a good defense than a good run defense than a bad run defense. But I think that if you're going to prioritize one of the two, how you build your defense, you got to shut down the pass. And the Jets now have a defense that can shut down the pass. And they've done it the last couple of years. 2021, the defense was a disaster. Everybody wanted Jeff Ulbrich fired in 2021. In fact, I was very critical of Jeff Ulbrich, so I have to eat some crow on this myself. We don't hear a lot about Jeff Ulbrich anymore. Everybody credits Saleh for the defense. Let's give Jeff Ulbrich some love here. The guy certainly took enough grief 3 years ago when the defense was awful, when he had no players. But the Jets have slowly built their defense. And I mentioned in the last segment how I got issues with the way Joe Douglas has built the offensive line. I think Joe Douglas has been phenomenal with the defense. And Joe Douglas has been phenomenal with half the ball. He's had a vision for half the ball. And maybe that goes to what who the coaching is, partially who the coaching is, because Robert Saleh is a defensive coach. I'm not sure Robert Saleh has a great vision for the offensive side of the ball. He's got a great vision for the defensive side of the ball. Where have the Jets loaded up? They've loaded up at defensive line, and they've loaded up a corner. Those are the two most important positions in today's NFL on defense. They can get after the quarterback. They got pass rushers. Now, they inherited Quinnen Williams, but they did extend him. They brought in defensive end after defensive end. They developed Bryce Huff, who now is in Philadelphia. They developed John Franklin Myers, who's now in Denver. They've developed Jermaine Johnson, who had a big jump from year 1 to year 2. They've brought in Hassan Reddick, who, hopefully is going to show up one day. And he will. And then once he does, we'll forget all this nonsense, and it'll be great. They've drafted Will McDonald, who, hey, look, they've developed other guys, so hopefully they can do it for him too. And a corner. Look, they drafted Sauce Gardner, and on some level, I understand it. If you want to say everybody knew Sauce was going to be great. And look, there's only so much credit I can give for a top 5 pick, because top 5 picks are top 5 picks. Everybody knows they're going to be great. That said, Sauce was not the first corner taken in 2022. So, Stingley was by Houston. So it wasn't that obvious. You could miss in the top 5. So you're great on a curve in the top 5 because, that's where the most of the great prospects are, but you can still miss. The Jets did not miss, to their credit. DJ Reed, a phenomenal free agent sign. Oh my goodness, what a good free agent sign. This is, for years I've talked vaguely about what you should look for in free agents. Looking for the guy who's ascending, looking for the guy who's in his mid-20s, looking for the guy, who plays better, looking for the guy who's maybe a little undervalued. And finally, we found a guy. I'm not sure if other people took me seriously when I said all this stuff. Finally, I have a guy I can point to and say, this is the guy. This DJ Reed fit that to a T. He finally put it together the last year of his rookie contract. A little undersized, so people were a little skeptical of him. He was kind of at an age where he was entering his prime, plays a premium position, did not command a big salary, has turned into one of the top number 2 corners in the league. He would be the number 1 corner on a lot of teams, because the Jets have Sauce. He's the number 2 corner. And a great third day pick, Michael Carter II. In the Douglas era, probably the only guy who was a day 3 pick who's turned into a plus starter. So Jets have done it at corner. And look, again, I'd love to shut down the run, and I have some concerns with the Jets' run defense. But I can't complain about the way the defense has been built, because the priority should be stopping the pass, because that is ultimately what wins you games. There've been statistical studies on this. It's correlated. Shutting down the pass correlates to wins and losses. Shutting down the run, not so much. So the Jets have done a good job building their defense. Defense has never been the issue for the Jets. It's been the issue a couple times. The team was just so bad, like 2020, 2021, that stretch. The team was so bad that the defense dragged it down. But many of the years the Jets have been bad. The defense has been good, but the defense has not been good in the right spots. This year's Jets defense is not just going to be good. It should be good in the right spots. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the show. Have a great Tuesday, everybody. Send in your mailbag questions. Tomorrow we'll do our weekly mailbag show.